If you can't even make a sales pitch, you're useless. Quit," Jackson said with a smirk. Brown tossed my personal items packed in a cardboard box. "Here, I've packed your things for you." Was it his fault that my desk was empty? I contorted my face in frustration. At the party, Jackson approached me with a servile grin. "Hey, long time no see. I've heard about your achievements at Day Corporation. I never imagined you'd be working at such a prestigious company." His compliment was tinged with envy. "Thanks, but I'll be going now." It was Brown next to me who held my arm. "Manager Jackson says he's willing to hire you back at our company. Let's get along like the old days." We never got along. I looked at them coldly and said, "You were the ones who said, if you can't even make a sales pitch, you're useless. Quit, or is it that you need the help of a useless person now?" Jackson's face contorted. It seems the rumors were true that the system at Corp had malfunctioned. "I'm Sam Johns. At 52, I belong to the sales department of a real estate company that sells built-for-sale homes. However, I'm not really in sales. I handle data entry into the real estate and customer information systems. I'm basically behind the scenes. Truth be told, I have experience in sales from the past. When I joined this company as a new graduate, it was standard for all men to be assigned to the sales department. Walking around from morning till night checking land for new homes wasn't a burden. But what I couldn't handle was making customer rounds. I have a stutter, and it becomes glaringly obvious when I'm nervous in front of clients. I tried various things like attending speech classes, but I couldn't overcome it and felt desperate. However, my boss at the time recognized my efforts and thought I could excel behind the scenes without facing customers. So he created a position for me in systems. In an effort to repay my boss's kindness, I worked tirelessly and managed to contribute to the company in a certain way. But the arrival of a new boss who doesn't acknowledge my efforts at all was, in retrospect, the beginning of my misfortune. Slacking off again, Johns. Just staring at the screen won't turn you a penny. Startled by the yelling from above, I nearly dropped the notepad I was holding. I'm checking for duplicate customer data. I'm not slacking off. But Jackson only grew more irate. "What? Who do you think you're talking to like that?" Beside the threatening Jackson, my colleague Brown chimed in smugly. "Unlike you, we're out here communicating with clients and making money. Must be nice to work with machines where you don't need any communication." Brown's condescending attitude never fails to exasperate me, even though he's the same age as me. I wish he would just go away. I want to finish this data check today. As I was thinking this, my subordinate Smith approached me. "Mr. Johns, the boss wants to hear your opinion. He mentioned the homes we sold all at once recently, the ones built for sale." Relieved by the unexpected rescue, I got up from my seat. "I'll be right there, thanks, Smith." I could hear Jackson clicking his tongue in the background. "Acting all high and mighty because you're the boss's favorite. I'll put you in your place one of these days." I knew Jackson and Brown were not pleased that the boss often relied on me. I never imagined he would resort to such drastic measures. That day, Jackson was unusually cheerful. It was typical for him to suddenly come to my desk, but what he asked next surprised me. He suggested that I take some paid leave. Vacation, but the system. With a bad feeling, I tried to decline, but Jackson clapped me on the shoulder and loudly persuaded me. Actually, the low vacation uptake rate in the sales department has become an issue. Everyone, including myself, loves their work too much, which is unavoidable, I suppose. But it seems the stiff folks in HR don't understand that. Essentially, he doesn't want to be blamed by HR, so he's telling us to take a break. Knowing that the low vacation uptake rate in the sales department is due to Jackson's own work over rest policy, I was disgusted, yet he sincerely believes his subordinates love their jobs. Though I do have accrued leave and could take it, I was reluctant to act according to Jackson's wishes. Just as I was about to firmly decline, the ever-obsequious Brown cut in. If you, as a supervisor, don't take leave, it makes it hard for your subordinates to take theirs, doesn't it? Glancing at Smith, who was working at his desk, Brown spoke. Since Smith has been under me, he too has been working without much break. Perhaps sensing my change of heart, Brown added with a sly grin. Yeah, the president and the executives are currently overseas on inspection. So they won't be suddenly asking for your opinion like usual. They won't be back until the end of the month, so now's the perfect time to use up some paid leave. I've often been suddenly called upon by the president to prepare data and documents for meetings. I'm the only one who can handle such tasks, but with the executives away, I shouldn't be getting any rush jobs. I figured it would be fine to leave the regular work to Smith. With that thought, I decided to take a week off as Jackson and the others suggested. What kind of mess is this, and how are you going to take responsibility for it? That was the scolding from Jackson that greeted me when I returned from my vacation. Though he was yelling, his mouth was relaxed, and he seemed oddly pleased. Confused and rooted to the spot, Smith hurried over to me. You are finally back. I tried calling you so many times but couldn't get through, and I didn't know what to do. I wondered what he meant by not being able to get through. It was Brown who kindly explained the situation to me, seemingly understanding. This system went down because of a virus in the data you managed. What was the point of always being glued to your computer? You weren't just pretending to work and slacking off, right? The system went down. I turned pale as Smith quietly explained the details. Apparently, 2 days ago, the system suddenly stopped, and we could no longer access the blueprints or the detailed schedules for the construction of the homes currently being built. Due to the chaos, the sales department had to reschedule client visits and push back deadlines just to cope. Smith, realizing he was out of his depth, tried to contact me first, but for some reason, neither calls nor emails got through. That's ridiculous. I had my phone with me during the vacation, but it never rang once, nor did I receive any emails. Amidst my confusion, Jackson yelled at me. We finally got a contractor to sort the system out, but hey, Johns, how are you going to take responsibility for this? Brown, grinning slyly, looked meaningfully at Smith. The crime of halting operations is serious. Well, if you won't take responsibility, maybe he will have to. At this point, I realized they had set me up. The sudden vacation, the system getting a virus while I was away, it must have been their doing. That Smith couldn't reach me was probably because Brown had interfered. I only have a company-issued cell phone. Since I don't make external visits, I always leave it plugged into the charger at my desk. It would be easy to tamper with my phone when I'm not looking, to block all calls and messages from the company or Smith. But I also realized that if I resisted, they would make Smith the scapegoat. Smith, like I used to be, is not good with words, but I chose him as a subordinate because he's skilled in data analysis. I only did what my old boss did for me, but Smith deeply appreciates it. I'm sure he would even quit the company for me if necessary. It irks me to play into Jackson's hands, but I must protect Smith at all costs. I clenched my teeth and glared at Jackson. Am I that much of an eyesore to you? I'm a member of the sales team, too. But the response I got from Jackson was harsh. If you can't make a sales pitch, you're useless. Quit. Jackson smirked. It seems he wants to fire me while the president and executives are away. Brown threw my personal belongings packed in a cardboard box. Here, I've packed up your stuff. Was he the reason my desk was empty? His efficiency was astounding. I twisted my face in frustration. Smith, looking shocked, raised a protest to Brown. Brown, what are you doing? Without Johns, this system might not even function properly. But neither Jackson nor Brown took Smith's words seriously. Wow, you are standing up for your boss. That's quite the spirit. but in a company, someone has to take responsibility for mistakes. I held back Smith as he was about to retaliate and shook my head. It's okay, Smith, they just don't like me, that's all. But Mr. Johns. Smith looked forlorn, but there was nothing more I could do. I slumped my shoulders and left the office carrying a cardboard box. My resignation was accepted immediately. Without a job lined up, I decided to travel for refreshing. Thinking that a dip in a hot spring might clear my head, I ended up having an unexpected encounter. Isn't that Mr. Johns? What a coincidence. It was White, the president of a former client, an interior design firm. President White, this is a surprise, to meet you here of all places. In her yukata at the inn, White looked even more beautiful than usual. White, winking playfully with one eye, confided in me. Actually, our company will be handling the renovation of this inn, and I wanted to check its original condition before we start. That explained why she was staying here. As a former member of the sales team, I used to attend meetings with Day Corporation. Her company's interior design plans are always innovative yet carry a hint of nostalgia, no doubt due to experiences like these. I genuinely admired that and expressed it openly. You're amazing, President. That must be why your company is doing so well. However, my praise seemed to cloud her expression. I worried I had said something wrong and panicked, but White just gave a wry smile and invited me to dinner. Mr. Johns, would you mind discussing something over dinner? At the restaurant. White shared her concern that there might be a discrepancy between the interior designs her company proposes and what the clients actually prefer. We show the clients several plans, and they choose the one they like best, but somehow their satisfaction isn't very high afterwards. A hunch came to me, and I asked White. You do gather the client's requests before presenting the plans, right? White nodded emphatically. Of course, we gather responses from a preliminary survey and use them to develop the plans, White explained. That approach is likely the cause, I suggested. White looked surprised and asked, What do you mean? I smiled at White reassuringly. Actually, the company I used to work for encountered a similar problem. Though she seemed caught off guard by my reference to my former company, I continued. Buying a home is a lifetime decision. And the company wants the customers to be satisfied, so they ask all these detailed preferences beforehand. That makes sense, White nodded deeply. I nodded back and added. However, even if we tried to sell homes that matched the client's wishes, we often face cancellations at the last minute. Cancellations are tough situations for sellers in any industry. All the money and effort spent on marketing would be wasted. I was determined to reduce the cancellation rate and finally figured out why the cancellations were happening. Really, that's impressive. It seems White understands the difficulty of reducing cancellation rates. I cleared my throat before explaining to her. Before buying a spec home, customers always have a current residence, whether it's a rental or their family home. I focused on their original living environment. People usually don't want to stray too far from their familiar surroundings. Those who lived in areas with lots of nature tend to want to live near parks with trees. And those from hot regions may dream of snow but wouldn't choose to live in it. Essentially, what most people want is a slightly better version of their current environment without changing too much. I see, so it's like enjoying staying in a suite on vacation, but hard to imagine living in one, right? Her quick understanding is indeed a sign of her intelligence. I nodded and continued. Exactly. A common reason customers gave for last-minute cancellations was that they couldn't envision living there. Realizing that their current apartments or houses were the basis for this image, I researched clients' living environments in detail. I extracted common factors and matched them to spec homes that fit these criteria, although doing this manually took a lot of time. So, I decided to create an algorithm that could find a perfect spec home for customers in one go. I never thought the skills in data processing and statistics I acquired in college would come in handy in this way. By integrating this algorithm into the existing system, the closing rate for our spec homes significantly increased. Previously, if we managed to sell 100 spec homes a year for $500,000 each, we were happy, but now, we sell over 1,000 homes a year, thanks to the algorithm. The president, ecstatic with the success, has ordered me to patent it. It's an algorithm generating over $500 million in sales annually, so it's natural to want to protect it. After I finished explaining, White's eyes welled up with admiration. That's incredible. The sudden boost in O Corp's performance was thanks to your patent, Mr. Johns. I just chuckled in response. Then White frowned. I actually thought it was due to some brilliant salespeople. I've been looking to poach someone like that. Poaching? I asked, tilting my head. One of our issues has been the lack of skilled salespeople. But it wasn't about sales skills but your contribution. White explained. Flattered by the praise, I scratched my head sheepishly. White laughed, but her expression soon turned serious. You mentioned earlier about your former company. After doing so much, even securing a patent, what happened? Moved by her genuine concern, I felt compelled to tell her everything. I recounted how I had been forced out by Jackson and Brown's schemes, and White listened in shock. Unbelievable. Could the system failure have been orchestrated by those two? And yet, why did you have to resign, Mr. Johns? I had to resign because it looked like my subordinates were going to be blamed. Besides, any evidence of the system's failure has probably already been destroyed. There was nothing I could do. I explained. However, after listening, White suddenly grasped my hand. President, what's wrong? I asked, startled. With a determined look, White declared. If O Corp says they don't need you, then I want you. Would you consider joining my company? Taken aback by such a straightforward offer, I was at a loss. Convinced by her earnestness, I agreed to join White's company. Once I joined Day Corporation, prompted by White, I immediately started solving problems. However, I didn't use the patented algorithm since I had transferred those rights to O Corp. And using it would jeopardize both myself and Day Corp. But there was no problem in using the underlying idea of the algorithm. I listened to all the employees and thoroughly checked the customer data to identify common factors again. It turned out to be about color. When changing interiors, the key reference point for customers seemed to be the colors of the homes or apartments they grew up in or were accustomed to. After my discovery, I proposed to White at Day Corporation to experiment by integrating the colors from customers' previous homes into our interior plans. My suggestion was taken to a meeting and unanimously adopted. Apparently, White had been enthusiastically sharing the success of my $500 million patent achievement throughout the company. Thanks to her groundwork, no one doubted my capabilities, and the proposal was implemented. Honestly, I was nervous about whether it would work, but 3 months later, it was clear my efforts had paid off. Customer satisfaction skyrocketed unexpectedly. Clients were approving plans in one go, and there were no complaints even after completion. The company was in a celebratory mood. Naturally, anyone would be disheartened after repeatedly revising plans for clients, only to have them canceled because they weren't what the client envisioned. Now that such cancellations had nearly vanished, employee motivation soared. As a result, Day Corporation's sales tripled from the previous year, and White was thrilled. The only way to repay you, Mr. Johns, is this. The Vice President's position is currently vacant. Please take it. Vice President. My eyes widened at the offer, and White chuckled sweetly. Our company won't discard a golden goose like O Corp did. We know the best thing is to make sure you're comfortable and can thrive here. She said. Being called a golden goose might be a bit much, but being kept by such a beautiful president isn't too bad. I must have been playing right into her hands thinking this way. Thus, I became the vice president and committed to helping White and the company's growth. Meanwhile, my former company, O Corp, was facing turmoil. Since I have become vice president, I often attended industry parties with White. Or rather, she would drag me out to every gathering. As a part of Day Corporation, everyone needs to recognize you. We can't let other companies poach the man who created a $500 million idea, nor can we let other women flirt with you. White said with a meaningful chuckle. Don't worry, I'll be right by your side. Just enjoy the party like you're on a big, safe ship. She reassured me. Being close to such a beautiful woman might raise my blood pressure, but it was a direct order from the president, so I couldn't refuse. Thus, I found myself attending parties and industry meetings almost every week. I wasn't great at sales pitches, but I wasn't too shy to make small talk either. As I became accustomed to the party scene, I started making acquaintances and enjoying conversations. That day, after parting ways with White, I was exchanging opinions on recent industry trends with a client's executive. Thinking of grabbing a snack, I headed toward the buffet, but a familiar voice from behind made me turn around. It was none other than Jackson, my former boss, who had approached me at the party. Jackson, once so arrogant, now sported a servile grin. Hey, long time no see. I've heard about your success at Day Corporation. I never imagined you'd work for such a prestigious company. His compliment was tainted with envy. Knowing Jackson's penchant for women, he was probably irked to see me standing next to the stylish White. But I was fed up with his petty jealousy. Thanks, but I'll be going now. It was Brown next to me, who grabbed my arm. Ignoring my irritation, he forced a twisted smile. Manager Jackson says he's willing to hire you back at our company. Let's get along like we used to. We never got along. I looked at them coldly and said, weren't you the ones who said if you can't even make a sales pitch, you're useless? Quit, or perhaps you need the help of a useless person now. Jackson's face contorted immediately. It seems the rumors of a system failure at O Corp were true. Though the rumor had spread, I had already known about it from my former subordinate, Smith, before it became public. Jackson and Brown thought the president favored me because I developed a patent, but that wasn't the case. If it were, the president wouldn't frequently seek my opinion. What really interested him was how I would develop the algorithm further. The algorithm needed to be evolved alongside the system to be meaningful. The original real estate system could handle massive amounts of data and process it all at once. But it still required updates every few months. My role at that company was to fine-tune the algorithm to align with those updates. Unfortunately, Smith couldn't handle those adjustments. Plus, Smith was angry at Jackson and Brown for forcing me out. He would definitely not take on the role of making those adjustments willingly. As a result, discrepancies between the system and the algorithm grew until the system eventually stopped working. Damn, how much do you know? Well, everyone is struggling because the system you worked on isn't functioning. But no one understands the patented technology, not even Smith, who has given up. Jackson said, followed by Brown. So, don't be stubborn and help us fix it a bit. Manager Jackson is having a hard time because he's blamed for letting you go. Brown pleaded. I just sneered at Brown. You wanted me out badly enough to set a trap, right? Well, you got what you wanted. Now deal with it yourselves. Jackson, who was initially acting submissive, suddenly became furious. Don't mess with me, someone who couldn't even handle sales properly. You're just dead weight. Just shut up and do as you're told. I snapped back at Jackson's audacity. You're kidding, let me guess. The virus incident was your fault too. Right, you harmed the company just to frame me and force me out, and now you dare ask for my help. That's too much. Still, Jackson didn't back down. As he forcefully tried to drag me away, Brown joined in by pushing me from behind. They were desperate to get me out of the venue, to have a private conversation with just the three of us. If I don't fix the system, I'm going to lose my job. Come on, we've worked together for so long as colleagues. Help me out this one time," pleaded Brown. The only thing Brown ever did as a colleague was holding me back. I'm not kind-hearted enough to help someone who only dragged me down. Just as I was about to shake off the two of them, a scream-like shout came from behind. "What are you doing to our precious vice president? Are you trying to kidnap him or something? Security, do something about these guys." Seeing the security guards rushing over, Jackson and Brown turned pale and quickly let go of me. White stepped in front of me and glared at the two men. A beautiful woman's glare has twice the impact, and even the brazen duo was taken aback. "No, you've got it wrong, President White. It's a misunderstanding. We were just having a chat as old friends," pleaded Jackson. "That's right. I just wanted to talk to Johns outside. It's nothing like a kidnapping," he added. But White raised her voice even more, likely intending for all the guests at the party to hear. "Really now, I know all about you framing Mr. Johns and firing him. What do you want with an employee you've dismissed now? Surely you are not thinking of having him fix your company's system that's rumored to be in trouble. Are you? Mr. Johns is now an important part of our company. Don't lay your dirty hands on him." While saying this, White pulled my arm towards her, intertwining it with hers, drawing the attention of everyone around. The gaze then shifted to Jackson and Brown. The two shrank under the not-so-friendly stares. "It's not like that. We just wanted him to take a look at our company's system. He knows it best, just a quick look, and if he can find a cause, that would be enough." Seeming to sense Jackson's intent to appease White rather than me, Brown too fawned over her. "Yes, exactly. Johns suddenly resigned, and we've been unable to handle the system troubles internally. The handover to Smith didn't go well, and now we're told he can't do anything. Johns is our only hope." But White scoffed dismissively at their pleas. "Suddenly resigned? It sounds like you're saying Mr. Johns quit on his own. But that's not the truth, is it? I know what you two did, driving him out because you envied him." Faced with a glaring beauty, Jackson and Brown turned pale. "Driven out? No, that's not it, Johns. Tell them that's not true." "That's right. You resigned to take responsibility for the mistake, didn't you? Tell President White that." Faced with their pleading looks, I shrugged. "Forgot already? You told me an incompetent like me should quit. Have you lost your memory or what?" The onlookers seemed to agree with me. As the atmosphere around Jackson and Brown grew even colder, seeing them shrink, White spoke up firmly. "We will officially protest to your company president for trying to forcefully take our vice president Johns. Be prepared for that." The word vice president shocked Jackson. "A vice president? No way. I heard he joined 3 months ago, and he's already climbed that high. That's impossible." Brown, who was my contemporary, stood dumbfounded, not realizing I had been promoted. The harsh words from White and the shock of my promotion left Jackson and Brown speechless. They slunk away from the party. Later, White indeed took me with her to officially protest at O Corporation, where she exposed everything Jackson and Brown had done to President Williams. "You're saying they blamed the virus intrusion on Mr. Johns and fired him? I can't believe employees of our company would do such a thing. Besides, that would only cause trouble for the sales staff themselves," said the bewildered president. I decided to give him some advice. "If you suspect falsehood, please check the system logs. They should show who accessed the system when the virus was planted. My guess is that it was probably Brown." People who are not familiar with computers often forget that unlike humans, machines remember everything. As expected, Brown, who hadn't even thought of the logs, had left his access history in the system. It was Smith who brought these records to the president, looking pleased to see me. Confronted with irrefutable evidence, Brown turned pale. It wasn't my fault. Everything was done under Manager Jackson's orders, he exclaimed, quickly betraying Jackson. The friendship of villains is short-lived, they say. You traitor, after all I've done for you, you betray me like this, Jackson lashed out. The one who said it would never be found out was Manager Jackson. I'm not to blame. In front of everyone. President Williams, witnessing this disgraceful exchange, looked like his blood pressure might shoot through the roof any moment. Will you shut up, you fools? What do you mean by planting a virus in our vital company system to frame someone? He thundered. Jackson and Brown, sweating, looked down in shame. Mr. President, I'm truly sorry you have to deal with such employees. But you must pay for the trouble they caused by falsely accusing Mr. Johns. I said. White, in disbelief, spoke up, causing the two quarreling men to suddenly turn their gaze towards me. Sorry, Johns, my bad. I was just irked that you were recognized by the president even though you're not in sales. I took it out on you. Please forgive me, Jackson said, bowing his head. Seeing this, Brown hurriedly bowed as well, saying, I too felt overshadowed because, despite being your colleague, you obtained a patent and shone so brightly. I'm always out on sales, yet I've never advanced, so I envied you. Please, forgive me. However, I was not swayed by their apologies. It was clear they thought they could smooth things over and escape the consequences. The decision on your punishment is up to the president. But it will affect our company's dealings with Day Corporation, depending on what you decide. I prompted President Williams, who after glaring at the two, stated firmly, keeping such people in the company would only lead to more victims like John's. I cannot allow that to happen. Both of you are fired as of today. As Jackson and Brown collapsed in silence, I left the old company with White, feeling lighter. Afterwards, Jackson and Brown were not only fired but also faced legal action. This was because intentionally infecting the system with a virus was deemed sabotage. Smith finding a USB with the virus still on it at Brown's desk might have sealed their fate. Smith sneered, they didn't even disposing of the evidence. What fools! Despite repeated offers from Williams to return, I chose to decline. At my old company, besides Jackson and Brown, there were many who frowned upon me just sitting in front of a computer all day. Rather than working in such a cold environment, it's definitely 100 times better to work at Day Corporation, even if it's smaller, where everyone respects my opinions. I'm really glad I met you, Mr. Johns. That hotel was my lucky spot. Would you like to go there again together sometime? What does she mean by together? Caught up in the ambiguity of our beautiful president, whose intentions are not always clear, I continue to enjoy my new workplace every day.
Hey there, I'm Zoe. I've always been good at reading people. It's probably why I became a psychologist. I had my own private practice and spent most of my waking hours helping others sort out their problems. Ironic, right? Considering what happened later. Anyway, there I was, approaching my late 30s, when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I wanted a family. Crazy how that sneaks up on you. My best friend, Sarah, must have sensed my sudden desperation because she offered to set me up with her second cousin. Come on, Zoe, she said over coffee one day. He's a great guy. Smart, funny, and he's got a good job. What be you got to lose? I sighed, stirring my latte absently. I don't know, Sarah. Blind dates aren't really my thing. She rolled her eyes. It's not a blind date if I show you his picture first. Besides, you two can chat online before meeting. It's perfect. That's how I found myself friend requesting Mark on social media later that evening. To my surprise, we hit it off right away. Mark was 38, just a year older than me, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Our chats were easy, flowing from one topic to the next without any awkward pauses. We chatted for weeks before finally agreeing to meet in person. I was nervous as hell, palms sweating as I waited for him at the coffee shop we'd chosen for our first date. When Mark walked in, I felt my breath catch. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He spotted me and waved, making his way over to my table. "Zoe?" he asked, extending his hand. I nodded, returning his smile. "That's me. It's nice to finally meet you in person, Mark." He sat down across from me, and just like that, the nerves melted away. We talked for hours, losing track of time until the barista politely informed us they were closing. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Mark turned to me. "I had a great time, Zoe. Would you like to do this again sometime?" I didn't hesitate. "I'd love to." And just like that, I found myself falling headfirst into a relationship with Mark. We started seeing each other regularly, going on dinner dates, walks in the park, and even a few weekend getaways. As our relationship progressed, I noticed something peculiar about Mark. His phone was constantly buzzing with messages. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have busy lives, right? But the frequency was unusual, even for a popular guy. One night, as we lay in bed after a nice dinner, his phone lit up for what felt like the 100th time. I couldn't help myself. "Busy night, huh?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Mark glanced at his phone and smiled sheepishly. "Oh, it's just my mom. She likes to check in." I raised an eyebrow. "Your mom? At this hour?" He shrugged, looking a bit uncomfortable. "Yeah, we're pretty close. She raised me alone after my dad died when I was 5. I had pretty bad bronchial asthma as a kid. There were times she literally saved my life." I listened as Mark opened up about his childhood. The more he talked, the clearer the picture became. His mother wasn't just devoted, she was his entire world. "Sounds like you two have a special bond," I said, choosing my words carefully. Mark nodded enthusiastically. "We do. I owe her everything." As a psychologist, alarm bells were ringing in my head. The relationship Mark described sounded codependent, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I wasn't his therapist, I was his girlfriend. It wasn't my place to analyze their relationship. Weeks turned into months, and soon we'd been dating for nearly a year. Mark was sweet, attentive, and our relationship felt solid. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind about his relationship with his mother. One day, as we were having lunch at my place, Mark suddenly looked nervous. "Zoe," he began, fidgeting with his napkin. "I'd like you to meet my mom. I think you'll really like her. She's excited to meet you too." The next weekend, I found myself standing outside a modest 2-story house, my palms sweating. Mark squeezed my hand reassuringly as he rang the doorbell. The door swung open, revealing a petite woman with graying hair and Mark's kind eyes. She smiled warmly at us. "You must be Zoe," she said, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "I'm Helen. Come in, come in." As we settled in the living room, I couldn't help but notice how Helen's eyes never left Mark. She fussed over him, asking if he wanted a drink or a snack, completely ignoring my presence. I watched their interaction, feeling more like an observer than a participant. Helen dominated the conversation, constantly bringing up stories from Mark's childhood or fretting over his health. As we left a few hours later, I felt drained. Mark, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the awkwardness. "So, what did you think?" he asked eagerly as we drove away. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Your mom clearly loves you very much." Mark beamed. "She's great, isn't she? I knew you'd like her." I forced a smile, not having the heart to burst his bubble. But as we drove back to my place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something far more complex than a mother's love. 6 months flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was down on one knee, a sparkling ring in his hand. Despite my lingering concerns about his relationship with Helen, I said yes. I was in love, and I truly believed we could work through any issues together. We decided to move in together, into my apartment, of course. As we dove into wedding preparations, I quickly realized this wasn't going to be the fun, exciting experience I'd always imagined. Helen inserted herself into every decision, every detail. It wasn't just the wedding, either. Helen called constantly, always with some crisis that required Mark's immediate attention. One evening, as we were discussing flower arrangements, Mark's phone rang. He answered immediately, his face creasing with concern. "What's wrong, Mom? The sink's leaking? I'll be right there." He hung up and turned to me apologetically. "I've got to go help Mom. Her sink is leaking, and you know how she is with plumbers." This scene repeated itself almost daily. If it wasn't a leaky sink, it was a stubbed toe or a sad mood that only Mark could lift. And if he ever hesitated. "After all I've done for you," Helen's voice would crack over the speakerphone. "I just need a little help. Is that too much to ask?" I couldn't take it anymore. One night, after Mark returned from yet another Helen emergency, I decided to broach the subject. "Mark," I said gently, "I think it might be helpful if we saw a couples therapist. Someone who could help us navigate this situation with your mom. I think her demands are a bit excessive." "Excessive?" Mark's voice rose. "She raised me alone, Zoe. She saved my life multiple times. How can you call that excessive?" I backpedaled, realizing I'd hit a nerve. "I'm not saying she doesn't love you. I'm just worried about the impact on our relationship." Mark softened slightly. "Okay, maybe you're right, but can we do it after the wedding? We're so busy right now, and I don't want to add more stress." I knew I should push harder, insist on addressing this before we tied the knot. But I was exhausted from fighting this invisible battle with Helen. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, dress fittings, and endless phone calls with Helen. Before I knew it, we were just days away from the wedding. Despite the stress, I was excited. My friends had planned a bachelorette party, and I was looking forward to a night of fun without wedding talk or Helen drama. We hit our favorite bar, laughing and dancing. For the first time in months, I felt light, free from the constant tension of planning a wedding under Helen's watchful eye. Then my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. "Zoe," his voice was tight with panic. "Mom's in the hospital. Her blood pressure spiked. I'm heading there now." I quickly explained the situation to my friends and called a taxi. The ride to the hospital felt endless, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The moment Helen saw me, her face crumpled. "Oh," she moaned, dramatically covering her face with her hands. "It's you. My blood pressure, it's your fault. All this wedding stress." I froze, shocked by the accusation. "Helen, Helen peeked through her fingers, her eyes narrowing at me. "I can't handle this right now, my poor heart." Mark turned to me, his expression apologetic but firm. "Zoe, could you wait outside? Just for a bit?" Stunned, I nodded and walked out, collapsing into a chair in the hallway. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, nurses and doctors bustling past me. Finally, I stood up, determined to understand what was happening. I approached the nurse's station, using every ounce of my professional demeanor. "Excuse me," I said to the doctor charting nearby. "I'm Zoe, Helen Johnson's future daughter-in-law. Could you tell me about her condition?" The doctor looked up, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Johnson's blood pressure is elevated, but not dangerously so. We're monitoring her, but there's no immediate cause for concern." I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. "Doctor, I'm a psychologist. And I'm concerned that Mrs. Johnson might be dealing with some psychological issues. Has anyone evaluated her mental health?" The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an interesting observation. We haven't done a psychological evaluation, but given what you're saying, it might be worth looking into. I'll make a note to refer her for an assessment." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your help." Returning to my seat in the hallway, I waited a bit longer, hoping Mark would emerge. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized he wasn't coming out anytime soon. Defeated, I sent him a text, heading home. Call me when you can. I called another taxi and went back to our apartment. My phone buzzed with messages from my friends, asking where I'd disappeared to. I sent a quick apology, telling them to enjoy the rest of the night without me. It was past midnight when I heard the key in the lock. Mark shuffled in, looking exhausted. "Hey," he said softly. "You're still up." I sat up, trying to keep the hurt and anger out of my voice. "How's your mom?" He sighed, sinking into the armchair across from me. "She's okay. They're keeping her overnight for observation." I stayed until she fell asleep. She was so upset, Zoe. She kept asking me not to leave her alone. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mark, do you really think that's all it is? Don't you see what's happening here?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Zoe, please, not tonight. Can we just go to bed? I'm exhausted." I wanted to argue, to make him see reason. But looking at his tired face, I knew it was pointless. So I nodded, swallowing my frustration. The big day finally arrived. Mark pulled me aside just before the ceremony and took a deep breath. "Look, I know things have been tense with Mom lately. But I've made some arrangements to keep her happy today. I just need you to go along with it, please?" My heart sank. "What kind of arrangements?" Mark explained quickly. Helen had a special menu prepared for her, citing non-existent allergies. She'd be seated next to Mark at the head table, not with the other parents. The DJ had a list of her favorite songs to play. And, Mark added hesitantly, she wants to make a speech. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "Okay," I said finally. "For you, for us." He kissed me gratefully, and I returned to my bridesmaids, plastering on a smile. The ceremony itself was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Mark's face light up, I felt a surge of love that pushed all my doubts aside. For a moment, it was just us. The reception was an experience. True to Mark's word, Helen held court at our table, regaling everyone with stories of Mark's childhood. She barely acknowledged my presence, except to occasionally pat my hand condescendingly. When it came time for speeches, I watched in horror as Helen tottered up to the microphone, wine glass in hand. "My dear friends and family," she began, her voice wavering. "We're here to celebrate my only son's wedding day." She went on for what felt like hours, talking about Mark's childhood, his accomplishments, and how she'd sacrificed everything for him. I was mentioned exactly once, as an afterthought. As she finally wrapped up, Helen raised her glass. "To my son, and his wife. May they be as happy as Mark and I have always been." I downed my champagne in one gulp. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We danced, we laughed, we cut the cake. And through it all, Helen hovered, always ready to interject herself into every moment. The wedding is over, but as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, nothing changed. Helen called every day, sometimes multiple times a day. There was always some crisis, some reason she needed Mark's immediate attention. One day, as he grabbed his keys, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mark, we need to talk about this. It's not healthy, for any of us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, you're right. We should see someone. A therapist, like you suggested. Let's look into it this weekend." But when the weekend came, there was always some reason to postpone. Helen needed help with her grocery shopping. The lawn needed mowing. The cat needed to go to the vet. And so it went, week after week. Empty promises and endless excuses. 3 months into our marriage, I was at my wit's end. The constant intrusions from Helen, Mark's unwillingness to set boundaries, and the strain on our relationship were taking their toll. When my vacation time came around, I saw it as a golden opportunity. "Mark," I said one evening, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, "let's go on a honeymoon. Just the two of us, away from everything. What do you say?" To my surprise and relief, Mark's face lit up. "That sounds amazing, Zoe. Where do you want to go?" We spent the next hour excitedly planning a tropical getaway. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. This was our chance to reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. "I'll take care of everything," Mark promised. "The flights, the hotel, all of it. And when we get back, I promise we'll deal with the situation with Mom. Maybe look into that therapy we talked about." The day of our departure arrived, and I was practically bouncing with excitement as we drove to the airport. Mark seemed a bit distracted, but I chalked it up to pre-flight jitters. As we approached the check-in counter, Mark handed me my boarding pass. I glanced at it, then did a double take. "Economy?" I asked, confused. "I thought we were flying together." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, about that. I had some credit card bonuses I could use, but there was only enough for one first-class ticket. I figured since I'm taller, it made sense for me to take it. It'll save us money overall." I stared at him, hurt and bewildered. "But, it's our honeymoon. Couldn't we have both flown economy and sat together?" "Come on, Zoe," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Don't make a big deal out of this. It's just a few hours." Swallowing my disappointment, I tried one last time. "Okay, well, can I at least come to the first-class lounge with you before the flight? We could pay extra." "No," Mark cut me off quickly. "The ticket's in my name. They won't let you in." "Look, I've got to go check in. I'll see you on the other side, okay?" Before I could respond, he was gone, wheeling his suitcase towards the first-class check-in. Feeling deflated, I made my way through security and to the regular boarding lounge. As I sat there, trying to salvage my excitement for the trip, a familiar figure caught my eye. There, just outside the first-class lounge, I saw a flash of graying hair and a floral dress that looked suspiciously like something Helen would wear. My heart started racing. Was I imagining things? Had the stress of the past few months finally made me paranoid? But Mark's strange behavior, his insistence on flying first class alone, his refusal to let me into the lounge, it all suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. Before I could talk myself out of it, I marched up to the first-class lounge desk. "Excuse me," I said, pulling out my credit card. "I'd like to purchase access to the lounge, please." The attendant looked skeptical, but processed my payment. As she handed me the access card, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might find. I pushed open the door to the lounge, my eyes scanning the plush seats and buffet tables. And there, in a quiet corner by the window, sat Mark and Helen, heads close together over cups of coffee. They looked comfortable, like they were embarking on their own little adventure. I took a deep breath and strode towards Mark and Helen, my heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. They both looked up as I approached, and I saw the color drain from Mark's face. "Zoe," he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice ice cold. "Care to explain why you're here with your mother instead of your wife?" Mark glanced nervously around the lounge. "Zoe, please," he said in a low voice. "Let's not do this here. I can explain everything after we land, I promise." Before I could respond, Helen chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Oh, Zoe dear, what a surprise. Mark and I are just about to take off for a lovely first-class trip together. Isn't that nice? But what are you doing in this lounge?" Mark stepped between us, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Zoe, I'm sorry. The truth is, there were enough bonus points for 2 first-class tickets. I thought Mom deserved a nice trip, and what about me, Mark?" I practically shouted, no longer caring about the scene we were causing. "I'm your wife. We're supposed to be starting our life together, but instead, you're jetting off with Mommy dearest while I'm shoved in economy like an afterthought." The lounge had gone completely silent. Every eye was on us, but I was beyond caring. "Do you have any idea what it's been like these past few months?" I continued, years of frustration pouring out. "The constant calls, the emergencies, the way you always put her first. And now this?" How could you do this to me? Mark reached out to touch my arm, but I jerked away. Zoe, please, he pleaded. You need to calm down. We can work this out. Once we're on vacation, we'll have time to talk, to get closer. We can fix this, I promise. I stared at him, suddenly feeling very calm and very, very tired. Fix this? I repeated quietly. Mark, there's nothing left to fix. I'm going home and I'm filing for divorce. Mark's jaw dropped. Divorce? Zoe, you can't be serious. But Helen cut him off, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She stood up and linked her arm through Mark's. Well, if that's how you feel, dear, I think it's for the best. Come along, Mark. We don't want to miss our flight. I watched in stunned silence as Helen led Mark away. He looked back at me once, his expression a mix of regret and relief, before they disappeared through the boarding gate. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of dozens of curious stares. Then, without a word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the lounge. As I made my way through the airport, my mind was oddly blank. I should have been crying, screaming, feeling something. But all I felt was a strange sense of liberation. I spent the next few hours gathering Mark's belongings. Clothes, books, the silly knickknacks his mother always bought him. I packed it all up methodically, my mind oddly calm. When I was done, I called a courier service and had everything sent to a nearby storage facility. The next day, I contacted a divorce lawyer. As I signed the preliminary paperwork, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was the right decision, I knew it in my bones. Instead of wallowing, I decided to use my vacation time for myself. I redecorated the apartment, erasing all traces of Mark. I reconnected with old friends, started yoga classes, and spent long hours reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years. A month passed, and my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Zoe, please, can we talk? I typed out a brief response. Storage facility number 247. Access code 8891. Your things are there. Divorce papers have been sent to your mother's address. Please sign and return them. Then I blocked his number. Returning to work was like a breath of fresh air. I threw myself into my practice with renewed energy. My experiences, painful as they were, had given me new insights into codependent relationships. I channeled this knowledge into a series of research papers, carefully anonymizing the details. To my surprise and delight, these papers caught the attention of the psychology department at the local college. They invited me to give a guest lecture, which turned into an offer for a part-time teaching position. It was at the college that I met James. He was a fellow professor in the psychology department, tall, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We bonded over shared research interests and a mutual love of terrible puns. As the weeks passed, James and I grew closer. He was everything Mark wasn't: independent, respectful of boundaries, and wonderfully self-assured. He had a teenage daughter from a previous marriage, and watching him balance his role as a father with his career and our budding relationship was a revelation. One evening, as we were grading papers together, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my old friend who had originally set me up with Mark. Hey Zoe, it read. Thought you should know, Mark's still living with Helen. If anything, they seem even closer now. I'm so sorry for my part in all this. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at the message for a moment, then set my phone aside. James looked up, concern in his eyes. Everything all right? He asked. I smiled, realizing that for the first time in a long time, I truly was all right. Yeah, I said. Everything's fine. And it was. Mark and Helen's relationship was no longer my problem. I had my own life to live, my own path to follow. I'm Victoria, and I guess you could say I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Not that we were filthy rich or anything, but my childhood was pretty damn good. Mom and Dad? They were like something out of a rom-com, always holding hands, stealing kisses when they thought I wasn't looking. We lived in this cozy little house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it was home. Every weekend was like a mini adventure. Dad would pack us all into our beat-up station wagon, and off we'd go. Sometimes it was a hike in the nearby state park, other times a trip to the local cinema to catch the latest blockbuster. School was, well, school. I wasn't the popular kid, but I wasn't the outcast either. Just your average student trying to navigate the minefield of adolescence. I had a small group of friends, real friends, not those fake ones who only hang around when it's convenient. High school flew by in a blur of exams, awkward school dances, and late-night study sessions fueled by too much caffeine and junk food. Before I knew it, graduation was looming on the horizon. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Mom and Dad, a stack of college brochures spread out in front of us. "So, Vicky," Dad said, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, "any idea what you want to do with your life?" I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I'd been both dreading and looking forward to. "I want to be a cardiologist," I blurted out. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those looks that parents seem to perfect, a whole conversation without a single word. "All right," Dad finally said. "If this is what you really want, we'll make it happen." Getting into med school was just the beginning. The next 4 years were even more intense than undergrad. There were times I thought my brain might explode from all the information I was trying to cram into it. But there were amazing moments too. The first time I successfully drew blood from a patient, after a few embarrassing misses. The day I correctly diagnosed a heart murmur during rounds. The moment I realized that all this hard work was actually turning me into a doctor. Graduation day was surreal. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I saw my parents in the audience. Mom was crying, of course, and even Dad looked misty-eyed. As we left the auditorium, Dad threw his arm around my shoulders. "So, Dr. Adams," he said with a grin, "what's next?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the future on my shoulders. "Now," I said, "I become a cardiologist." Little did I know, my journey was far from over. In fact, the real challenges were just beginning. Fresh out of med school, I dove headfirst into my career at a private clinic in the city. The hours were long and grueling, but I loved every minute of it. I was finally doing what I'd dreamed of for so long, helping people, saving lives. As the months flew by, my hard work started to pay off. My bank account grew, and for the first time in my life, I had more money than I knew what to do with. On a whim, I walked into a car dealership one day and drove out in a sleek new sedan. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, bought with my own hard-earned money. A few months later, I signed the mortgage papers on a spacious apartment in a nice part of town. As I stood in the empty living room, keys in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I was living the dream I'd worked so hard for. With the holidays approaching, I decided to take a few days off to visit my parents. I hadn't seen them in months, and I was excited to share my success with them. But as soon as I walked through the door of my childhood home, I knew something was off. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mom and Dad were in the same room, but they might as well have been on different planets. The warm, loving atmosphere I remembered was gone, replaced by a cold, uncomfortable silence. At dinner, the tension was palpable. Mom and Dad barely looked at each other, let alone spoke. I tried to fill the silence with stories about work, but my words fell flat in the frosty air between them. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen while she was doing the dishes. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "You and Dad, you're acting like strangers." Mom's hand stilled in the soapy water. She didn't turn around, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "It's nothing, honey," she said, her voice tight. "People change, that's all. Your father and I, we're just different people now." But I knew my mother. I could hear the pain behind her words. "Mom, please, tell me the truth." She sighed, finally turning to face me. The sadness in her eyes broke my heart. "Your father, he got a promotion at work a few months ago." With it came a personal assistant, a young woman. My stomach dropped. "Mom, are you saying?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "He's been staying late at the office, more and more. I think she might be his mistress." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My dad, the man I'd idolized my whole life, cheating on my mom? It didn't seem possible. "I'm going to talk to him," I said, anger rising in my chest. "How dare he do this to you?" "No, Victoria," Mom said, grabbing my arm. "I've already decided. I'm going to file for divorce. I've talked to a lawyer, everything's planned out." I stared at her in shock. "Divorce? But can't you work it out?" She smiled sadly. "Some things can't be fixed, sweetheart. And I don't want you to get caught in the middle of this. I have no hard feelings towards your father, and I don't want you to either. These things, they happen in life. We need to be understanding." I couldn't believe how calm she was being about all this. If it were me, I'd be furious, devastated. But here was my mom, handling it all with grace and dignity. The divorce hit like a hurricane, leaving destruction in its wake. Mom, bless her heart, didn't go down without a fight. She demanded half of everything and extra compensation for Dad's infidelity. To his credit, Dad didn't argue. He paid up without a fuss. But the real kicker? Before the ink was dry on the divorce papers, Dad married his assistant. His mistress. My new stepmother. I nearly choked when I saw her. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. 22 years younger than Dad, for crying out loud. She was closer to being my friend than my stepmother. Not that I wanted anything to do with her. I kept my distance, limiting my interactions with Dad and his child bride to bare necessities. It hurt to see him with her, to see how quickly he'd moved on while Mom was still picking up the pieces. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. I got an offer to work at a prestigious clinic in another city. 2 years, great pay, and a chance to study under Dr. Harriet Chen, one of the most renowned cardiologists in the country. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. I called Mom as soon as I got the news. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she exclaimed, genuine joy in her voice. "You have to take it. This could be huge for your career." Her enthusiasm was infectious. For the first time in months, I felt excitement bubbling up inside me. This was my chance for a fresh start, away from all the drama. Word of my impending move must have spread because Dad called me the next day. "Vicky," he said, his voice hesitant, "I heard you're moving." "Yeah, Dad. Got a great job offer in." He cut me off. "Listen, I need to ask you something. It's a bit awkward. Things at work, they're not great. My income's taken a hit. I was wondering, could Sarah and I use your apartment while you're gone? And maybe, borrow your car?" I was speechless. After everything that had happened, he had the nerve to ask this? "I don't know, Dad. I need to think about it." I hung up, my mind whirling. Part of me wanted to tell him to get lost. But another part, he was still my dad. I called Mom, dreading her reaction. To my surprise, she was calm. "It's your apartment, your car, Victoria," she said. "You're an adult. You get to decide what to do with your things. I won't be offended, whatever you choose." Her maturity made me feel small and petty. After a sleepless night, I called Dad and agreed. The day I handed over the keys was surreal. Dad looked sheepish, but Sarah, she had this smug look that made my skin crawl. As I handed Dad the keys, Sarah piped up. "Well, isn't this nice?" The keys finally returning to their rightful owner. She nodded at Dad with a simpering smile. I stared at her, then at Dad, confusion and anger bubbling up inside me. Dad quickly pulled me aside. "Vicky, honey," he whispered, "I need you to play along. I may have told Sarah that the apartment and car are mine. That I've just been letting you use them." I gaped at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. This man, who I'd admired my whole life, was asking me to lie. To pretend I hadn't worked my ass off for everything I owned. In that moment, something inside me broke. The last shred of respect I had for my father vanished. I looked at him, this stranger wearing my dad's face, and made a decision. Without a word, I turned and walked out of my own apartment. 2 days later, I was on a plane to my new life in a new city. As the plane took off, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For 2 years, I wouldn't have to deal with any of this drama. I could focus on my work, on becoming the best doctor I could be. The 2 years in the new city flew by like a dream. I kept in touch with Mom regularly, our weekly Skype calls a lifeline to home. She looked better each time, the sparkle returning to her eyes as she built her new life. Dad, on the other hand, was a different story. Our calls were audio only. He claimed he couldn't figure out all this newfangled video stuff. I didn't push it. Hearing his voice was hard enough. I wasn't sure I could handle seeing him with his new wife. When my contract ended, I returned to my old city with mixed feelings. I was excited to start back at my old clinic, but dreading the family drama I'd left behind. The day I went to reclaim my apartment, I stood outside the familiar door, key in hand, heart pounding. But when I tried to unlock it, the key wouldn't turn. Frowning, I knocked loudly. The door swung open, revealing Sarah's annoyed face. "Oh," she said flatly. "It's you." I pushed past her into the apartment and froze, my jaw dropping. The place was unrecognizable. Gone were my tasteful, muted colors, replaced by garish bright hues that hurt my eyes. My carefully chosen furniture had vanished, switched out for modern pieces that clashed horribly with the overall design. But the real shock came when I stepped into what used to be my bedroom. It had been transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib and changing table. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, whirling to face Sarah. She smirked, resting a hand on her very pregnant belly. "We needed to make some changes. This is our home, after all." "Your home?" I sputtered. "This is my apartment." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "No, this is your father's apartment. He's just been letting you stay here out of the kindness of his heart. And now, as his wife, I'm the lady of the house." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her the truth, but something made me hesitate. The sight of her swollen belly cooled my anger. I couldn't bring myself to stress out a pregnant woman, no matter how infuriating she was. I spent the next few hours seething, pacing the garishly redecorated living room. When Dad finally walked through the door, I pounced. "Dad, we need to talk. Now." He nodded, looking tired. "I know, Vicky, let's step outside." Once we were alone, I let loose. "What the hell, Dad? You let her completely trash my apartment? And what's this bullshit about it being your place?" He held up his hands placatingly. I know. It's complicated, sweetie." I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. "Things at work, they're not good. If Sarah knew we were living off your charity. Please, Vicky, don't kick us out. Not with the baby coming." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream and rage and throw them both out on their ears. But looking at my father, this broken, pleading version of the strong man I once knew, I couldn't do it. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "We'll figure something out." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you, sweetheart. Oh, and there's one more thing." I braced myself. "What?" "I may have given Sarah your car. When I found out about the baby, I wanted to do something nice for her. I'll pay you back, I promise." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "It's fine, Dad. The clinic's not far, I can walk." He kissed my hand, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "You're an angel, Vicky. We'll make this work, you'll see." As I watched him go back inside, I tried to convince myself this could work. I'd be at the clinic most of the time anyway. Maybe I could even learn to get along with Sarah. I threw myself into work with renewed vigor. The clinic became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the tension at home. I'd leave before dawn and return long after dark, tiptoeing through the apartment to avoid waking Sarah or the newborn baby. 2 months into this routine, fate threw me a lifeline. I was grabbing a quick coffee at my favorite cafe when I quite literally bumped into him. Tall, with kind eyes and a crooked smile, Jake was charming from the moment he helped me mop up my spilled latte. "I'm so sorry," he said, handing me a wad of napkins. "Can I buy you a replacement?" One coffee turned into dinner, which turned into more dates. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. For the first time in months, I felt light, happy. Jake was funny, smart, and best of all, completely removed from my family drama. I started spending more and more time at his place, relishing the peace and normalcy. It was a blissful respite from the chaos at home. But reality has a way of intruding. One evening, I arrived home to find Sarah waiting for me, her face like thunder. "Where have you been?" she demanded, bouncing a fussy baby on her hip. I blinked, taken aback by her tone. "At work, then out." "Why?" She thrust a mop at me. "This place is a mess. Your father can't afford a housekeeper, so you need to pull your weight around here. I'm busy with the baby." Anger flared in my chest. "I'm not your maid, Sarah. I work 60-hour weeks saving lives. I'm not spending my free time cleaning up after you." Her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little freeloader. Living off your father's generosity and you can't even help out? Maybe we should kick you out, see how you like that." I couldn't help it, I laughed. The sheer audacity of her threat was almost impressive. "Good luck with that," I said, turning away. For the next few days, I ignored Sarah's pointed looks and passive-aggressive comments about the state of the apartment. I focused on work and on Jake, counting the hours until I could escape to his place. Then, one afternoon, my world imploded. My phone rang, it was Jake. "Hey, you," I answered, smiling. "I was just thinking about you." "It's over," he cut me off, his voice cold. I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. "What? Jake, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Victoria. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I can't believe I fell for your act." "Jake, I honestly have no idea." "Save it," he snapped. "We're done." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, stunned. What the hell had just happened? Seconds later, a message popped up. It was from Jake, a photo. My heart stopped as I opened it. It was me, locked in a passionate kiss with a man who definitely wasn't Jake. Except, it wasn't me. The woman in the photo looked like me, but something was off. The hair wasn't quite right, the posture, not quite mine. Realization dawned, along with a wave of fury. Sarah. This had Sarah written all over it. I tried calling Jake back, desperate to explain, but my calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages bounced back, undelivered. He'd blocked me. I stormed into the apartment, fury radiating from every pore. Sarah sat on the couch, a smug smile playing on her lips. She knew exactly what she'd done. "You," I snarled, advancing on her. "What the hell have you done?" Sarah's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "It was easy, really. A little Photoshop here, a few messages there. You'd be surprised what people will believe when they're jealous." The casual way she admitted to destroying my relationship made my blood boil. "You fabricated that photo? And what messages?" "Oh, just a few posts on social media about how you're dating multiple men, looking for someone richer than your boyfriend. You know, the usual gold digger stuff." I was speechless with rage. How could someone be so callous, so cruel? Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Now listen here, princess. You're going to start pulling your weight around here. Clean the house, do the laundry, take care of the baby when I need a break. Or else." "Or else what?" I spat. "Or else I'll make sure your daddy knows what an ungrateful brat you are." He'll kick you out so fast your head will spin. That was it. The final straw. I threw my head back and laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You really don't get it, do you? I said, my voice dangerously low. This is my apartment. I bought it with my money. You're the ones who'll be out on the street if you don't apologize and help me fix things with Jake. Sarah's face contorted with rage. She opened her mouth to retort, but just then, the front door opened. Dad walked in, looking tired and confused at the tableau before him. Sarah immediately launched into a tirade. John, you won't believe what your daughter just said. She's threatening to kick us out. After everything we've done for her. She's an ungrateful, selfish bitch and I want her gone. Dad's eyes met mine, pleading. He leaned in close, whispering, Vicky, please. Just go along with it. Move out for a while. We'll sort this out later. I stared at him in disbelief. My own father, asking me to leave my own home. Something snapped inside me. No, I said, my voice steady and cold. I'm done playing along. This is my apartment. You two have until tonight to get out, or I'm calling the police and having you removed. Dad's face darkened. After everything I've done for you? I paid for your education. Your fancy medical degree. And I've more than repaid that by letting you live here rent-free and use my car, I shot back. We're even. Now get out. Sarah was screaming obscenities, Dad was trying to reason with me, but I stood firm. I watched in stony silence as they packed their things, Sarah alternating between cursing me and sobbing dramatically. As they walked out the door, Dad turned to me one last time. You'll regret this, Victoria. Mark my words. The silence in my newly reclaimed apartment was deafening. As I sat there, surrounded by the garish remnants of Sarah's decorating spree, I felt a sudden surge of determination. No more sacrifices. No more adjusting my life to accommodate others' lies and manipulations. It was time to take control. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could always count on, my mom. Mom, I said, my voice cracking. I need to talk to you. I poured out everything, the lies, the manipulation, the final confrontation. Mom listened patiently, her calm presence a balm to my frayed nerves. Oh, honey, she said when I finished. I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. You did the right thing. Her words were like a warm embrace. Thanks, Mom, but I've lost Jake. Sarah ruined everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Maybe not. Give me Jake's number. Mom, what are you? Trust me, sweetheart. I've got this. Bewildered but hopeful, I gave her the number. The next day, I received a text from Mom asking me to meet her at our favorite cafe. When I arrived, my heart nearly stopped. There, sitting across from my mother, was Jake. Mom waved me over, a mischievous glint in her eye. Sit down, Victoria. Jake and I were just having a lovely chat. Over the next hour, Mom laid out the whole sordid tale, Sarah's lies, Dad's deceptions, all of it. Jake listened, his face a mix of shock, anger, and shame. When Mom finished, Jake turned to me, his eyes brimming with remorse. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you, should have given you a chance to explain. I wanted to forgive him, but the hurt was still raw. You believed the worst of me so easily, Jake. How can I trust you won't do it again? To my utter shock, Jake slid out of his chair and dropped to one knee in the middle of the busy cafe. Victoria Adams, I love you. I was an idiot, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. Please, forgive me? The cafe had gone silent, all eyes on us. I felt a blush creeping up my neck, but looking into Jake's earnest eyes, I found my anger melting away. Oh, get up, you big idiot, I said, tugging him to his feet. Of course I forgive you. The cafe erupted in applause as Jake swept me into a kiss. Mom wiped away a tear, beaming at us both. Life has a funny way of working out. A couple of months later, we heard through the grapevine that Sarah had run off with a younger man, leaving Dad and the baby behind. She'd finally realized that Dad had no money or property to his name. Dad, in his desperation, tried to reconcile with Mom, but she refused him. 3 years passed in a whirlwind of love, laughter, and career success. When Jake proposed, properly this time on a moonlit beach, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Our wedding day was perfect. Mom walked me down the aisle, radiant with joy. As I exchanged vows with Jake, I caught sight of an empty seat in the back, the one reserved for Dad. He hadn't come. A pang of sadness hit me, but as I looked back at Jake, at Mom, at all the people who truly loved and supported me, I realized I had everything I needed. My name is Tiffany Mitchell, and I was born into what seemed like a typical middle-class family in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My parents, David and Sarah Mitchell, were absolutely obsessed with child development techniques and early learning methods. They had stacks of parenting books everywhere in our house, and Mom was always talking about some new theory she'd read about. "Sarah, don't you think we're overdoing it a bit?" I remember my dad asking one evening as Mom struggled to teach me simple arithmetic. I was barely 3. "No, David. These are crucial developmental years," Mom insisted, showing him yet another colorful flashcard. "The books say we need to start early." Looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how ordinary my development was, despite their tireless efforts. I sat up, walked, and talked right on schedule, no prodigy here. But instead of accepting that every child develops at their own pace, my parents saw me as their first failed experiment. Everything changed when my sister Jessica was born. I was 3 years old, and suddenly our house transformed into what felt like a baby genius boot camp. Mom had even taken special courses by then, determined not to make the same mistakes she thought she'd made with me. The difference in how they approached raising Jessica was stark. Where I had regular toys, Jessica had educational development tools. Where I had picture books, Jessica had cognitive enhancement materials. Every milestone became a celebration. Her first words came early, she walked before her peers, and she could solve puzzles meant for older kids. My grandparents, Peter and Eleanor Mitchell, lived just a few blocks away, and their house became my sanctuary. They treated Jessica and me exactly the same, showering us both with the same love and attention. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon when I was about 5, sitting on Grandma Eleanor's lap as she read stories to both Jessica and me. "Both of my granddaughters are perfect just the way they are," Grandma would say, giving us each a cookie. This always seemed to irritate Mom, who would purse her lips and mutter something about acknowledging exceptional talent. "Sarah," Grandma once said firmly during a family dinner, "children need love, not pressure. They're not science experiments." "Mom, you don't understand modern parenting," Dad jumped to Mom's defense. "Jessica shows real promise. We need to nurture that." I sat there, pushing peas around my plate, already understanding that in my parents' eyes, I was just the practice run, the rough draft before they created their masterpiece. Elementary school was a pretty normal experience for me. I wasn't at the top of my class, but I wasn't at the bottom either. I made friends, did my homework, and generally enjoyed being a regular kid. My report cards were filled with B's and the occasional A, which I thought was perfectly fine. My parents, however, barely glanced at them. Then came the day Jessica started school. But unlike me, who went to our local public school, my sister got a different treatment entirely. "We've enrolled Jessica in the Wellington Academy for Gifted Children," Mom announced proudly at dinner one evening. They rarely accept children so young, but they were very impressed with her test scores. I remember choking on my milk. Wellington was that fancy private school across town, the one with the huge campus and Olympic-sized swimming pool. The tuition there cost more than a car. The spending didn't stop there. Every time Jessica complained about the workload or threw a tantrum about homework, our parents' solution was to throw money at the problem. "I don't want to do math today," Jessica would whine. "It's too hard." "Tell you what, sweetie," Mom would say. "If you finish your homework, we can go to the toy store and get that new dollhouse she wanted." It didn't take long for Jessica to figure out this game. Soon, every minor accomplishment came with a price tag. "If I get an A on this test, can I get the new iPad, or I'll do extra credit if you buy me those designer shoes." Meanwhile, I sat at our kitchen table, doing my homework alone. No rewards, no special attention. Once, I got the highest score in my class on a science project, a solar system model I spent weeks building. When I showed it to Mom, she just nodded and said, "That's nice, honey." "Oh, did you hear? Jessica got accepted into the advanced mathematics program." The final straw came when I was 13. I had just finished decorating my room, the bigger of the two kids' bedrooms, with posters of my favorite bands and some photos of me with my friends. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was my space, my sanctuary. One evening, Jessica marched into the living room where our parents were watching TV. "I want Tiffany's room," she demanded, hands on her hips. "Mine is too small for all my things, and I need more space for my study area." I looked up from my book, certain our parents would shut down this ridiculous request. Instead, Mom and Dad exchanged glances. "You know, that makes sense," Dad said. "Jessica does have a lot more equipment and educational materials." "What? No," I protested. "That's my room. I've had it since I was little." But my objections fell on deaf ears. The very next day, while I was at school, they moved all my things into Jessica's smaller room. When I came home, I found Jessica already settled in my old room, her expensive desk taking up the space where my bed used to be. "This is so unfair," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "Life isn't fair, Tiffany," Mom said dismissively. "Your sister needs the space more than you do. Don't be selfish." I slammed the door to my new, smaller room and collapsed onto the bed that barely fit in the space. That night, as I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized something important. In this house, I would always come second. High school graduation was approaching, and I'd spent months researching colleges, writing applications, and dreaming about my future. I had decent grades and some good extracurricular activities on my resume. While I wasn't aiming for Harvard or Yale, I had my sights set on several solid state universities with strong business programs. That fateful family dinner started like any other. Grandma and Grandpa had come over for Mom's Sunday roast, and we were all seated around the dining room table. Jessica was bragging about her latest academic achievement while Mom and Dad beamed at her with pride. "So, Tiffany," Grandma Eleanor turned to me with genuine interest, "tell us about your college plans. Where are you thinking of applying?" I straightened up in my chair, excited to finally share my plans. "Well, I've been looking at State University's business program. There." "Oh, about that," Mom cut me off mid-sentence, setting down her fork with a sharp clink against the plate. "We've been meaning to discuss this with you, Tiffany. Your father and I have decided we won't be able to help with your college tuition. We need to save all our resources for Jessica's education. She's got a real shot at the Ivy League, and that's not going to be cheap." "You can't be serious." Grandpa Peter's fork clattered onto his plate. "What about Tiffany's future?" Mom sighed as if she were explaining something obvious to a small child. "Look, we have to be realistic here. Jessica is gifted. She has real potential. Tiffany is ordinary. She can get a job right out of high school or maybe take some community college classes if she saves up." "How dare you?" Grandma's voice shook with anger. "How can you dismiss your own daughter like this?" "Oh, please," Dad snapped, his face reddening. "Let's not pretend here. Tiffany's never shown any exceptional abilities. Higher education would be wasted on her. We're just being practical." I couldn't take it anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in. Shoving my chair back, I ran from the table, tears already streaming down my face. Behind me, I could hear the continued argument, my parents' cold logic clashing with my grandparents' outrage. A gentle knock came at my door about 15 minutes later. "Tiffany? Can I come in, sweetheart?" It was Grandma Eleanor. I didn't answer, but she came in anyway, sitting on the edge of my bed. Her warm hand started rubbing circles on my back, just like she used to do when I was little. "Your grandfather and I have made a decision," she said softly. "We're going to pay for your college education. All of it." I rolled over, wiping my eyes. "What? But that's too much money." "Nonsense," she smiled, reaching out to brush my hair from my tear-stained face. "You deserve an education just as much as anyone else. More, actually, because you've worked hard for it without any support." For the first time that evening, I felt myself smile. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I had people who believed in me, and more importantly, I was starting to believe in myself. College life suited me perfectly. Away from my parents' constant comparisons and criticism, I flourished in the business program. My professors praised my analytical thinking, and I discovered I had a natural talent for understanding market trends and investment strategies. Every weekend, I'd call Grandma and Grandpa to update them on my progress. I hadn't spoken to my parents since leaving for college. They hadn't tried to contact me either, which honestly made things easier. The only updates I got about them came through my grandparents, and one particular call changed everything. "You won't believe what's happening with Jessica," Grandma said one evening, her voice heavy with concern. "She's completely gone off the rails. You know, she got into Princeton, your parents wouldn't stop talking about it. But apparently, once she got there, away from your parents' constant supervision, she just stopped caring about school altogether." I listened as Grandma painted a picture of my perfect sister's dramatic fall from grace. Jessica, it seemed, had discovered parties, boys, and the freedom to do whatever she wanted. Her carefully cultivated image as the family genius crumbled in a matter of weeks. "Your mother called me in tears yesterday," Grandma continued. "The dean's office sent them a warning letter. Jessica's barely attending classes, and when she does show up, she's either late or hungover. What are Mom and Dad doing about it?" "Oh, they're beside themselves. They've tried everything, threatening to cut off her allowance, promising her a new car if she brings her grades up, even flying out to Princeton to talk some sense into her. But Jessica just laughs it off." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of giving Jessica everything she wanted, my parents had created someone who didn't know how to handle responsibility. A month later, Grandma called with an update. "Well, it finally happened," she said. "Jessica got kicked out of Princeton. Failed almost every class, and had too many disciplinary infractions to count." I could hardly believe it. The golden child, the genius, the one who was supposed to bring glory to the family name, kicked out of college after just 1 year. "She's moved back home," Grandma added. "Your parents are in shock. They keep saying there must be some mistake, that the university didn't understand Jessica's special needs as a gifted student." Over the next few months, through my regular calls with my grandparents, I learned that Jessica had settled into a comfortable routine of doing absolutely nothing. She slept until noon, went out with different guys every night, and treated our parents' house like a hotel. "Your father tried to get her to at least look for a job," Grandpa told me during one call. "She told him that work was beneath someone of her intelligence level." I felt vindicated and pleased. And at the same time, I felt relieved that I'd escaped their suffocating expectations and found my own path. After graduation, I landed a position as a junior investment analyst at Meridian Financial, one of the most respected firms in my hometown. Grandma and Grandpa insisted I stay with them until I got settled, and I gratefully accepted. The unexpected reunion with my parents happened on a Saturday morning at Marshall's Grocery. I was comparing prices on organic tomatoes when I heard my mother's voice. "Tiffany? Is that really you?" I turned to find both my parents standing there, looking older than I remembered. Mom was clutching her shopping cart like a lifeline. "We've missed you so much," Dad said, his voice unusually gentle. "Why don't you come over for dinner sometime?" Part of me wanted to decline, to remind them of how they dismissed me years ago. But curiosity won out. Sure, I heard myself say. When? The dinner was surreal. The same house, the same dining room table, but everything felt different. My parents couldn't stop praising my job at Meridian. Investment analyst. At such a prestigious firm, Mom kept saying. We're so proud of you, honey. James Wilson told me they only hire the best and brightest at Meridian. I could see Jessica's knuckles turning white around her fork. She'd just quit another retail job, her third that year. Over the next few years, I worked my way up at Meridian. Each promotion came with new responsibilities and challenges, which I tackled head-on. My parents started inviting me to regular family dinners, and I accepted occasionally, maintaining a careful distance while allowing them back into my life. Jessica continued her pattern of short-lived jobs and longer periods of unemployment, never leaving our parents' house. She'd work as a waitress for a few months, then quit because it was beneath her. She'd try reception work, then leave because it was too boring. Everything changed again at one of our family gatherings. Jessica burst through the front door, dragging along a tall, well-dressed man in his 30s. Everyone, this is Charles, she announced triumphantly. My boyfriend. Charles was polite and well-spoken, clearly from money. Jessica spent the entire evening shooting smug looks my way. See, she finally said during dinner, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I bet you didn't expect me to find someone before you did, Miss Career Woman. I just shrugged and took another bite of Mom's pot roast. Jessica's attempt to get under my skin felt childish, especially given everything I'd achieved. My parents, however, were completely smitten with Charles. They hung on his every word about his family's real estate empire and his private school education. When he left that evening, promising to take Jessica to some fancy restaurant the following weekend, Mom pulled me aside. Isn't it wonderful? She whispered excitedly. Charles comes from such a good family. They own half the commercial properties downtown. Jessica's finally found her path to success. I didn't bother pointing out that dating a rich man wasn't exactly a career achievement. Some things never changed. My big break at Meridian Financial came when I spotted a critical error in one of our major investment portfolios. The senior analysts had overlooked a pattern of high-risk investments that could have cost our clients millions. I stayed up 3 nights straight, analyzing data and preparing a comprehensive report. Ms. Mitchell, this is remarkable, Mr. Davidson, our CEO, said during the emergency meeting I'd called. How did you catch this? I noticed inconsistencies in the risk assessment models, I explained, walking them through my findings. If we redistribute these investments now, we can not only avoid losses, but potentially increase returns by 12%. My strategy worked better than anyone expected. Within 6 months, the restructured portfolio showed a 15% increase in returns. Clients were thrilled, and Meridian's reputation soared. I followed this success by developing a new investment algorithm that helped identify emerging market opportunities before our competitors. Then came the day that changed everything. I was called into the boardroom, expecting another routine meeting. Tiffany, Mr. Davidson began, we're creating a new position of investment director, and we want you to fill it. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Investment director? That would put me in charge of all investment strategies for the firm. It was a massive promotion, skipping several traditional career steps. The first people I called were Grandma and Grandpa. They were beside themselves with happiness and pride. I shared the news with my parents at our next family dinner. To my surprise, they seemed genuinely excited. This calls for a celebration, Mom declared. You must have a party. I was thinking of reserving a private room at La Maison, I said, referring to an upscale restaurant downtown. I could invite the whole family and... Oh, no, Mom interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. You should have it here. Your father and I will help organize everything. It will be much more personal, more special. I'll invite all the relatives, order catering from that wonderful place on Oak Street. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself agreeing. Over the next week, I transferred money to my mother's account for the party expenses, and she kept me updated with regular phone calls. The evening started with such promise. I arrived at my parents' house wearing my favorite black cocktail dress and pearl necklace, a graduation gift from my grandparents. The house was beautifully decorated, with fresh flowers on every surface and elegant place settings at the dining table. The caterers had outdone themselves, the aroma of gourmet food filled the air. Family members were already there, mingling in small groups. My grandparents gave me warm hugs, Aunt Susan kissed my cheek, Uncle Robert patted my shoulder. Jessica was holding court in the living room, wearing a stunning blue designer dress, with Charles by her side in an expensive suit. Once all the guests had arrived, we gathered around the large dining table. I stood up, champagne glass in hand, ready to make my announcement. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight," I began. "Oh, sweetie, let me." Mom jumped up, cutting me off mid-sentence. Her voice was almost singing with excitement, but not for the reason I expected. "We've gathered here today," she announced, beaming at the assembled family members, "to celebrate a wonderful occasion. Our beautiful Jessica and her wonderful Charles are engaged to be married." The room erupted in gasps and congratulations. Jessica pretended to blush while showing off a massive diamond ring I hadn't noticed before. Charles smiled proudly beside her. I fell back into my chair, my champagne glass nearly slipping from my numb fingers. This couldn't be happening. The party I had paid for, my promotion celebration, had been hijacked for Jessica's engagement announcement. Looking around the table in disbelief, I saw nothing but genuine happiness on everyone's faces. Even my grandparents were smiling and congratulating the happy couple. That's when it hit me, none of them knew this was supposed to be my celebration. My parents had invited them to an engagement party, not a promotion party. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood up, anger burning in my throat. But before I could say anything, I felt my father's iron grip on my wrist. He pulled me close, his smile never wavering for the benefit of the guests, but his whispered words were ice cold. "Don't you dare make a scene," he hissed through clenched teeth. "If you ruin this for your sister, we'll cut you off completely. No inheritance, no family, nothing. Sit down and smile." I yanked my hand away from my father's grip. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the cheerful chatter. "Everyone needs to know the truth." The room fell silent. Jessica's smug smile froze on her face. "This party," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "was supposed to be celebrating my promotion to investment director at Meridian Financial. I paid for everything, the food, the decorations, all of it. My parents took my money and turned my celebration into an engagement party for Jessica without telling me." Gasps and whispers filled the room. Aunt Susan's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "That's not true." Mom tried to interrupt, her face flushing red. "Tiffany, stop this nonsense right now." "Show them the invitation, Aunt Susan," I said calmly. "What does it say?" Aunt Susan fumbled in her purse and pulled out the cream-colored card. It says join us in celebrating the engagement of Jessica Mitchell and Charles Aldridge." Charles stood up slowly, his face darkening. "You told me this was a family dinner where you'd announce our engagement. You never said anything about stealing your sister's celebration." "Charlie, baby, let me explain," Jessica started, but he cut her off. "No, I've seen enough." He turned to me. "I'm sorry, Tiffany, I had no idea." Then he looked at Jessica. "This engagement is off. I won't be part of a family that treats people this way." "Look what you've done," Jessica shrieked at me as Charles walked out. "You've ruined everything. You're just jealous, because I found someone and you're still alone." "Jealous?" I laughed incredulously. "I'm the investment director of a major financial firm. I don't need to steal someone else's party or trap a rich man into marriage to feel successful." "That's enough," Dad roared, standing up. "You've gone too far, Tiffany. You're no longer part of this family. Consider yourself disinherited." "Fine by me," I said, but before I could continue, Grandpa's voice boomed across the table. Actually, David, he said, standing up with Grandma, your inheritance won't matter much. Eleanor and I have already changed our will. Everything we have is going to Tiffany. What? Mom gasped. She's the only one in this family with any integrity, Grandma added, her voice firm. We've watched for years as you favored Jessica and pushed Tiffany aside. No more. The evening devolved into chaos after that. Relatives began leaving in embarrassed hurries, Jessica ran upstairs in tears, and my parents stood in stunned silence. I picked up my purse and walked to the door, holding my head high. Goodbye, I said, not looking back. Don't contact me again. That was 3 years ago. I haven't spoken to my parents or Jessica since that night. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica still lives at home, bitter about losing Charles and his money. My parents tried to reach out once or twice, but I blocked their numbers. My grandparents, though, remain my rocks. We have dinner together every Sunday, and they're more proud of my achievements than my parents ever were. Sometimes I think about that night and realize it was the best thing that could have happened. It freed me from seeking approval from people who would never truly give it. Last week, I was named the youngest CEO in Meridian Financial's history. When I told my grandparents, Grandma cried happy tears, and Grandpa opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. To authenticity, he toasted, and to finding your own path. I raised my glass and smiled. Finally, I was exactly where I was meant to be.